There was me, that is Lee, as I sat in my dining room trying to make up my flumpy dumps of what to do with the evening. I'm drinking milk plus some chocolate powder, or Nesquik, which is what I was drinking. This would sharpen you up and make you ready for a bit of the old ultra-violent video game. Unfortunately, someone cut the blood and explicit content, and then they said we weren't allowed to play our games because they were on the naughty side. But that's okay, because it's time for another
Reasons to be Cheerful.
Censorship has always and will always be a controversial topic. Now, depending on how you look at it, it's a blunt weapon for opposing freedom of speech or an important tool in protecting a moralistic ideal. Now, history has taught us that there can be an abhorrent evil in how censorship can be used, but equally there also has a positive place in modern society. On a smaller scale, the modern age of entertainment has seen censorship become part and parcel of the creative process. At one point or another, all forms of entertainment have been subject to some sort of certification and censorship. Here in the UK, the British Board of Film Classification have been responsible for the content of most forms of video since 1912. In 1950s America, even comics were subject to censorship thanks to the Comics Code. Of course, as gamers, we've all seen ESRB or PEGI ratings splash screens before new game trailers, and it's very likely that we've all experienced a film, book or comic that was at some point censored or even banned at some point. This censorship of video games is a storied one. And when we think of games being censored, we think of games like Mortal Kombat and Night Trap, prompting the American government to discuss the certification of violent and sexually explicit video games, a move which has had far greater implications around the world as other countries implemented their own means of age-rating interactive entertainment. Just as the once banned movie The Exorcist is incredibly tame now when compared to the likes of the Saw movies, as does Death Race, Night Trap and the original Mortal Kombat look through today's rose-tinted specs, as the boundaries of realism and taste have been slowly nudged forward over time. As the times change, our view on potentially offensive content changes, and not only that, as the internet has opened our eyes to all manner of cultures, subcultures and alternative viewpoints, it's all the more harder to escape seeing something that genuinely offends us. The subject of what's generally offensive and what's acceptable changes over time, and in terms of video games, the past few years have been less about how violence is portrayed on screen and more about diversity. Video games have had a long tradition of fumbling subjects such as ethnicity, gender and sexuality, mainly revolving around tired stereotypes and tropes. There was once a time when the only time you'd see any sort of diversity was in the cast of a one-on-one fighting game. Thankfully, now these days, these issues are being openly discussed and addressed by the industry and gamers alike. Which leads us to censorship in the modern age of gaming. While violence is very much a recurring element of the video game industry, what is and isn't acceptable in that area has largely remained the same over the last decade. But while we don't talk about violence in games as much these days, and maybe we should, the hot button topic on the internet is about sex, more specifically the censorship of potentially titillating content. And funnily enough, the biggest target has been Nintendo, that most family friendly of companies. Xenoblade Chronicles X is one of my favourite games of last year. It's a bloody great game and you should all play it. But a few outspoken gamers caused a ripple on the social media ocean when it was discovered that the Western versions of the game would be subject to some censorship. Let's play a game of Spot the Difference. Can you see the difference between this Japanese screenshot and this Western screenshot? This screenshot of party member Lin shows two entirely different versions of the same armour. And if you didn't notice, the armour of the Japanese version of Lin is more than a little inappropriate. If you were paying attention to the outcry of censorship from certain corners of the internet, for some reason mainly using anime avatars, you'd think that Nintendo had performed some sort of heinous act. But go beyond the cries of quote-unquote censorship and look into the reasons why these changes were made, and it all makes sense. You see, every country in the world is different. Yeah, we look different, we speak different languages, and our cultures can be very, very different. Our customs and lifestyles can be taken as incredibly offensive in some parts of the world, and vice versa. Japan is of course no different, especially in terms of how women are seen in media, especially video games. If you've ever played a game by Suda51 or Hideo Kojima, you know exactly what I mean. In Xenoblade Chronicles X, Lin is canonically aged 13. Do you possibly understand why that this costume may have been changed for a Western audience? And while this sort of portrayal is somewhat acceptable in Japan, in the Western world this sort of content is nothing short of controversial. Why would Nintendo, a family-friendly company, not make this change? This is not censorship, this is localisation. Localisation is the process of taking a form of media created for one audience and then making changes so that it can be released to a different one. While we think of localisation as just changing on-screen text from Japanese to English, a good localisation will just go beyond that. The best localisations will not only translate text into a form that other audiences can read, but they'll subtly change references, diction and phrasing so that this new audience can relate to the game. Not only that, they'll also change elements of game mechanics and other elements to become more palatable for these other audiences. This costume change is no different, and these types of amendments are not new to Nintendo games, or any other localised game for that matter. In recent years, the downloadable content for Fire Emblem on the 3DS experienced similar changes to that of Xenoblade Chronicles X, when this image was replaced with this one for Western markets. Yes, people complained, but did it really matter? These changes are just a casualty of localisation, something that companies like Nintendo have made for years. I mean, who could forget the time when Kirby fought Wham Bam Rock, a boss that more than resembles a backward portrayal of a particularly racist stereotype. This enemy from this SNES game Kirby's Fun Pack would later be amended for the DS remake, and for damn good reason. The point is that localisation ensures that as many people as possible can enjoy a game, and isn't that a good thing? One of the nice things about localisation is that this process can simply make games better, as mechanics are amended and certain facets of a game tightened up. Of course, if you really are stressing over these sort of cosmetic amendments, and it really does cause you that much of a detriment to your enjoyment of the game, you could always go as far as to import the original version of the title. It might be a good opportunity to learn a little bit more about another country's language, culture and customs. A broader understanding of the wider world can only make you a better person. This was another reason to be cheerful, and you can see another reason in a fortnight. However, there are plenty more great videos every day on the God Is a Geek YouTube channel, so why not subscribe and find out why more and more people would rather watch our channel than get poked in the eye. I'll be back next week for another episode of the Retrocast, so until then, goodbye.
Hey, wait, what are you doing?
I'm listening to this cool little indie band that I discovered. Oh! Should have backed the God Is a Geek Patreon.